All right, well, again, thank you, Dave, and thanks to All Cover for having us here tonight. My name is Eric Beckman. I'm one of the organizers of Business and Technology of Greater New York. With us tonight, we have Mitch Rothschild. Mitch, maybe you'd like to say a little bit and introduce yourself.
Sure. I am basically someone that starts and builds companies, which I've done over the last 25, 30 years. Spent the last 7 years building a company called Vitals. And what we do is we're in the business of taking the gross national product of the United States down. And we do that because we're in the medical business, and as you'll hear over the course of these questions, we try to lower the cost of care. And we do it in some fairly innovative ways. The way that probably gets the most attention and press is we actually pay people. We send them checks if they make the right decisions about medical care. So one example is if you want to get an MRI, you can get it at an imaging center for $500. You can get it in a hospital for $2,500. It's probably not something you're going to pay for because either your company or your plan will do it since you're past your deductible, most likely. Will intervene and send the patient, tell the patient, if you go to the imaging center, here's the quality scores, and if you choose the one that's less expensive, we'll share that savings with you. We'll give you a check for $200, and that helps us redirect care. And so net, it's $500 plus $200 instead of $2,500, and we save the system, whatever the math is on that, $1,800. And we do that a lot, and that's the business. We have a website called vitals.com, which is we'll talk about over the course of this evening. We get about 10 million people a month that come to the site and look for a doctor, leave ratings. It's kind of somewhere between Yelp and Kelly's Blue Book for doctors in terms of helping you kind of shop for a doctor the same way you'd shop for a car.
Great, thank you. Now, you've started numerous companies, Vitals, of course, as you just talked about, awards.com, Raspberry Red Marketing, and Russ Candy Bears, to name just a few. Within these organizations, where do you think your great ideas come from once these places are up and running?
So let me split that into two parts to that question.
Sure.
The first part is, where does the idea for the company come from, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And I would say the epiphany that I had in 1996, which is roughly when the internet sort of took over, was that was probably, arguably, other than handheld computing, the most important invention of our collective lives. That the ability to get massive amounts of information at our fingertips in a way that we couldn't do before 1996 changes almost everything. It changes the way we shop, it changes the way we think, it changes the way we communicate. And so everything I've done has kind of been that. I do believe that the internet is the alchemy of our age. I told you that we get on Vitals 10 million people a month, roughly, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, that come to the site. We pay roughly $0 for that, just because we're good at SEO and we search engine optimization. We understand how to work with Google. And most of the other companies that I've either started, and one of the companies I've got is actually a consulting company where the folks that work there help other companies get traffic on the web. And it's really just magic. I mean, where else can you get 10 million people to look at what you do for free? And so I'd say I probably, until I'm done with whatever work part of my life there is, it's going to be just taking advantage of broadly define the internet, which has expanded obviously into mobile and social media and such, but just that idea of being able to take masses of information and give them to people and let the decisions happen that way is astounding to me. So I'd say that's how we kind of start the company. Once we have the company, I think I've started probably 7 or 8 companies over the last 3 decades. And I would say not one ended up when it was successful, and 6 of them were, 2 of them weren't. But when it was successful, it was nothing like the business I thought we started. It was just, you just kind of I think the shortest distance between 2 points if you're an entrepreneur is a zigzag. It just really is not a straight line. You kind of iterate your way to something. And so you start out and you have an idea and a customer and a business, and I've come to believe that the 5 most important words in the business lexicon are, you want fries with that. And that's the concept of get a customer and then figure out what else they want. So we do a lot of work with health plans and employers, and we take them down to reasonably interesting places, Palm Beach or Palm Springs or other places for our user conferences that we have twice a year. Load them up with liquor, give them a nice place to stay, and then we have these groups where they sit for 4 hours and say what they would want developed off the basic product that we have. And so they tell us what they want to buy or what they're interested in developing, and then we go back, we have our sales guys go out and just verify that we've got a pre-sale before it happens, and that's really how the idea comes. If you ask your customers what they want next, and we're lucky that we have a fairly limited number of large customers, and they have an almost insatiable need for the kind of stuff we do, which is consumer-facing tools on healthcare. I mean, the healthcare IQ of this country is really low. I mean, if you think about it, where else do you go in and buy something where you don't know what it costs, right? I mean, that's kind of like a 5-year-old behavior. Somebody once told me that when you go to visit a doctor, it's the only transaction in the United States when either the buyer or the seller knows the real cost. And so people don't know what it costs. Where else is somebody else buying your insurance for you, right, as opposed to you buying your own insurance? Where else do you go and seek out care that can affect the rest of your life without really knowing how good it is? So, the health plans are sort of the leaders of trying to do that, and we are the front line for them. So I think a lot of the ideas come from your customers, and if you have a few good customers that, and they love it that the fact that, the new ideas are in conformance with what they want to do. And so I'd say that's once we have a company, and it'll take it another place. I told you that, what we do now is we kind of we have something called Smart Shopper that helps redirect care to more cost-effective, quality places. When we started the company, we thought we were a data company. We thought we were just going to collect data from around the web and, resell the data like, companies like IMS and others do. But, we do that a little, but that's not really the business. So I think the answer is if you've got the right customers, ask them, and what they'll tell you, where the next good ideas come from.
So to kind of summarize, it sounds like it's good ideas come as kind of an emergent property of fertile ground like the internet and wet focus groups.
Yeah, I mean, again, good ideas and bad ideas are not that easy to tell apart at the beginning. And if you're in we use agile methodology for our technology. I mean, we're pretty quick at failing, so we try to fail fast. So if we have something that's a pretty bad idea, we like to find that out early and iterate our way to the next generation of something. So not all, some of these ideas are just bad ideas, and so you find out hopefully early. One of the rules we have is that we encourage people to make mistakes, and we don't actually punish people for mistakes unless they're really dumb, or malicious mistakes. But the idea is that that's kind of how you stretch yourself into the next generation of what you're doing, and you try something, and you don't invest a lot in it before you sort of do, your 1.0 version. MVP is, minimum viable product is obviously a big word around what we do, and we kind of are guided by that famous line by Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn, who said, if you're not embarrassed of your 1.0 release, you're not moving fast enough. And that's kind of where we are. Is usually we wince a little at the first thing we put out there, but it kind of gives us a sense of whether we should invest more resources in it or not to really make it great.
Now, those kinds of values, would you say you've built a lot of that into all the companies that you've started? And how do you accomplish that when you're first forming a company? Speaking to the entrepreneur in you. Right.
So one of the things, I'd say there's 2 things that go into that. Number one, I kind of view myself, and I would say most CEOs, entrepreneurs do, view themselves as sort of being on stage every minute that you're with other people that you work with. And the way you behave and the way you act about something is the way that those values get transmitted. I well, sometimes, I used to do it more when I was a little crazier than I am now, but I would like just crumple up a piece of paper and throw it on the floor and see how many people walk by without picking it up. And if you got more than 3 people that walk by without picking it up, you know you got a problem, either with the people or with the culture of the company. And so one of the things we did early on is everybody in at least the first 75 to 100 employees that I have in a company, everybody gets stock. You know that old line of nobody washes a rented car? You know, because you're not putting it through the car wash. But so I don't want people coming into work thinking it's a rented car. I want them coming into work thinking it's their car. And so that's how you get people sort of invested in feeling it's their company. You know, always use the first person plural for just about everything you're doing. We, and get everybody, you know, if you've got somebody that's worked for you for more than 6 months and they're using third person like they probably shouldn't be in the company. You know, because you want to kind of have those values internalized. And then the first 8 or 10 people that you have in the company sort of set the culture. You know, do they cause stress, or are they fun? Do you trust them? How do they treat other people? Are they hard workers? And I fortunately have a band of about that number of people that have sort of worked with me for the last 15 years in 3 or 4 different companies, and you kind of start the company with them, and then it sort of radiates out. Up to a point. And I will maybe, you didn't ask the question, but I'll say it anyway. There comes a point in almost every company that I've heard called the Bermuda Triangle, which is when you get to about $10 to $15 million in sales, I would say the vast majority of companies lose their way. The analogy that I use is that if you're in the cabinet making business, which I gather most folks here are not in that business, but if you're making a cabinet and you do 5 cabinets a week, and you're used to doing that, next week you get an order for 6 cabinets, people work a little harder, they stay a little longer, next week you get an order for 8 cabinets, maybe you negotiate a little bit of delayed delivery, you maybe don't paint them as well, and then the week after that you get an order for 1,000 cabinets. You're in a different business. And what we really needed to do was when most companies get 10 or 15 million, the way you sort of operate yourself in terms of policies and scrappy, they don't scale. Somebody once described the way we did things early on as watching a bunch of 7-year-olds play soccer. The ball goes here and everybody chases the ball over here, then the ball goes there and they chase the ball over there, and that's kind of the way a lot of young companies do it, but then you have to sort of get to the next stage. I started Vitals about 7 years ago, and last year, I gave my ego an intensive workout, and I hired a CEO and just said I'll become chairman, but which was necessary to do because I wasn't ready to sit in meetings and talk about sales quotas and pipelines and 16.2 releases and how's it going versus 16.3. That's just not how my DNA works, but that's what the company needed. And so when you get to the next stage, you sort of have to build that set of values in there. So they kind of iterate. I'd say, you got to really have people you trust. I mean, if the staff doesn't trust the company and the company doesn't trust the staff, game over. So trust, hard work, and integrity.
Now you mentioned, you spoke a little bit about how you evaluate employees before. I was wondering if you might be able to elaborate on that a little bit and explain, what are, you mentioned you gave the example of the crumpled up piece of paper on the floor.
Yeah.
What other tools do you use to try to gauge the personality of the individual and the company as it grows?
Okay. So actually I wrote an article about this for entrepreneur.com on sort of some half a dozen interview questions that really give you a window into the sort of soul of the people you're hiring. One of the questions I love to ask is, what % of your life do you think you control? And it's obviously it's a perception question. It's not a reality. But if people are not saying a fairly high number, you probably don't want them, because it's a question of whether the world impacts you or you impact the world. And so I think, I sort of look for people that have that. I look for people in a young company, you're constantly zigging and zagging, and you have to be comfortable with change. I kind of, tell people some days we get in, everybody in the conference room, I said, take a different way home tonight. Just however you go, travel home, take a different way today, just so you get comfortable with change. I probably broke a couple of laws, but I once did not hire a guy because he had a mustache. And he was, I don't know, maybe 45 or mid-40s, and I asked him how long he had the mustache, and he said since college. And that's a reasonably fashion in, fashion out piece of facial hair. And if you're sticking to that for 20 years, through Tony Orlando and Dawn and, the next generation, you're probably not that adaptable to change. So I don't know what, mustache rights groups have to say about that, but it's that kind of thing is sort of, adaptable to change. I think the other thing, you want to get the right person doing the right job. I mean, if you're an engineer, you're going to be spending a lot of your day looking at a screen. And if you're a salesperson, you're going to spend a lot of your day talking to other people. And one of the questions that I'll ask if I'm trying to sort of see that fit is I ask people how they spend their free time. When you are actually in control of your time, what do you do? And usually when people talk about those activities, they tend to cluster either into solitary activities or group activities. I like to listen to music, I like to read, solitary activities. I go out with friends, right? And you don't want somebody who's a very social person having to sit in front of a machine all day, and you don't want somebody who's a very private person having to, go into a room and own the room and sell to other people all day. So, a lot of it is right fit for the right job. Mm-hmm. And so, you usually, also try to understand. I mean, I'd say, as with most technology companies, you kind of have to have a raw smart. And people just have to be smart. People, you have to have, just really intelligent, smart people. So, there's 18 different ways to get at that question. I mean, ask somebody what the last 2 books they've read are. You usually get some sense. If we're there, I'll often ask what their GPA was in school, and I'll, hear a lot of stories about, well, I was drunk my first year, and so I had to come back from that, and, finally got the GPA up to 3.4, but, that was like 4.0 after, my first year. And so, and you kind of want people that are comfortable with themselves. I have in my office a setup where I've got a couch and then one big overstuffed chair. It's sort of a match set. And we sit down, I kind of say to them, where are you going to sit, right? And so you can either sit in that overstuffed chair, or you can sit in the near part of the couch, you can sit in the far part of the couch, right? You sit in the far part of a couch, right? That's not a people person. I mean, just right off the bat, or they're either, nervous. I would say almost every salesperson I've ever hired has sat in that big overstuffed chair. I'm not really sure why, but just, salespeople will do that. We're in, our company's actually in New Jersey, so most people will drive in. I'll ask them their parking routine, how they kind of parked, right? In other words, did they just settle for a spot at the back and walk in, or did they actually see if maybe they could get lucky and get a spot right in front? Are you willing to settle for stuff? Or not? One question that I do ask that is, to me, always illuminating. There's really, to me, there's only one right answer, but I'll pose it to you. Everybody has different answers, but, and this happens in business all the time. You've got 2 jobs to do. Job A, to get done right, takes 2 hours. Job B, to get done right, also takes 2 hours, right? Your boss is away, they're both important, they're both due 3 hours from now. What do you do, right? I mean, doesn't that happen all the time in business, right? And how are people going to solve for that question, right? And are they going to say, well, I'll get them both done in 3 hours, in which case they're not really, realistic enough, well, I'll just ask, I'll figure out which one's more important, which you can't. So, I mean, I try to see whether people are sort of able to kind of figure out how you can navigate these conflicting priorities, and usually that'll tell me. Something about the folks, and just the idea is always to get people to drop the interview face, to kind of get them to just become who they really are. And there's certain ways to do that. I mean, one of the things we've tried to do, and we don't do it as much now as we've gotten bigger, we're over 200 people, is we used to basically, in our private meetings, fire everybody after 90 days that they were there. And then basically say, would I hire them today? So you've had 90-day trial run with that person, and would you hire them? And if the answer isn't a reasonably resounding yes, because by 90 days you should really know if somebody's doing a good job. And so, we'll figure out how to either give them a little more time or exit them out, because, I would say people problems almost never get better. That's just the way it is. I mean, and we're not really social workers, so you kind of have to do that. And sometimes I'll ask the question in the interview, which, I won't say, we're going to fire you after 90 days and then rehire you without telling you, but, I'll say, you're human, what am I not going to like about you in 90 days, and, and I will tell them what they won't like about the company in 90 days, because nobody likes everything. So, just kind of a way to sort of get a sense. And, we've got a pretty good track record. I would say we keep our voluntary terminations out of 200 folks. I think we had probably 5 last year, and involuntary were maybe 8 or 10, but usually those are folks within the first few years. The place where it really gets tricky is when I was talking about that Bermuda Triangle, when the company kind of grows and it grows past the skill level of people that started it. And then, they're great, but they're just not at the level of what you need for the next generation of the company. And then, you got to figure out how to either reposition them or figure out how to do that the right way.
Great. Well, let me shift gears a little bit now, and thank you very much for that insight. I'm sure we'll get a lot of questions at the end about that. Mm-hmm. I want to focus a little bit more on the impact that new technology has had on Vitals. I know we've, cloud computing, social media, there's a lot of buzzwords being, floated around the industry right now, and I'm just wondering how that kind of how those advances have affected Vitals since it's a 7-year-old company.
Right. So we're a healthcare company, and I didn't know anything about healthcare the day I got into it. I know a little bit more now. But healthcare is an amazing industry. It's the biggest industry in the United States, and in probably almost every area, it's a decade behind everything else. So all we really need to do is watch what's going on elsewhere in the world and try to kind of bring it in. And if you think about these big lumbering organizations, whether they're hospital systems or health plans or practice management systems, they tend not to move very quickly. And so, for example, we've tried to put agile methodology with some of these big plans that are used to kind of those big ERP, waterfall type ways that they develop. It doesn't take very well. And so I would say technologically we probably are too far ahead. I mean, it's just, it's a sort of a slow industry. I mean, one of the good things about the industry, somebody said this about health plans to me when we started. They said health plans are really slow to change, but once they change, they're really slow to change. So we never lose a customer, right? So, it's tough to get them in, but when you get them in, they don't do that. So I'd say, I think there's beginning to be more of consumer awareness that the decisions you make about where you choose a healthcare provider are as important as the decisions you make where you choose a restaurant or a car, like I alluded to earlier. And it's people are starting to use those tools in the web a lot more. But like you can go on our tools and you can know the actual out-of-pocket cost with our plan customers for most kinds of care that you're going to do. Now, that's amazing, right? I mean, who knows what it's going to cost? And, we all have that kind of Russian roulette when we open the bill from the healthcare. We have no idea if that bill is going to be $20 or $250, right, or even $800. We'll tell you that, and that's an incredibly good tool. It gets about 2% usage, right? Because who goes on their health plan site, right? And we sort of do it for health plans. So, a lot of it is just kind of the consumers catching up. Because we're in healthcare, that typically tends to affect people that are older and so are not as quick in the generational way to do it. I'm going to give you an example. There's a company in our industry, it's here in the city, called ZocDoc, which you may have heard of, that does online appointments, and they try to basically have become the open table for doctors, which at the beginning pissed me off, so I just asked the number 2 guy from Open Table to join our board, so that, we could be, we could hear from Open Table whether, and he didn't think, these guys are not the Open Table. But, I mean, they've done a pretty good job, and, it basically appeals to a group of people who are under 30 that want to not necessarily have to talk to somebody, but do it. And they have, worked really hard and raised $200 million and have like 3% of the doctors, wired up, and that's considered like a major league victory. Doctors, dentists, whatever. So it's just an industry that's really slow. And, we've got a lot of technology guys that, I'd say the hardest thing we do in terms of keeping folks is, that we don't do a lot of the cutting edge technology. I mean, we're rarely inventing stuff. We're sort of adapting existing technology, whether it's, data abstraction technology or, other software.
Okay, great.
So,
you've done so many of these startups, built so many companies, as we've spoken about before. For somebody who might be starting up their own company or assuming a leadership position for the first time, like, what do you think would be a key trait or a piece of advice that they should really internalize?
Okay, well, I'd say there's a few. I mean, leadership positions often go along with managing people. Just somehow those two have gotten connected or along the way, although, I think now with technology, there's a lot of these kind of architects and individual contributors and engineers that, are individual contributors. But, you sort of have to look in the mirror and kind of ask yourself, do I get more pleasure out of doing something myself or coaching somebody to do it? And if the answer isn't the second, you're probably not going to be as great in terms of managing people. And I'd say, you should sort of, I'd say, you have to kind of decide whether that's what you want. I mean, being a manager of people takes like way more patience than most of us have. And certainly, in a microwave, world, it just takes a lot of work to get people there. And so I'd say if you're going to go into leadership position, look in the mirror and say, do I really want to be managing people? If I want to be managing people, can I manage people? Do I understand how to motivate them, right? In other words, it's how do you get people to want to walk through fire for you, right? And that's some combination of they trust you, they like you, they believe your vision, you have some measure of charisma. One of the questions that I'll ask people sometimes is, would people sit in the middle seat of an airplane to talk to you? Right? And you kind of, if you're going to be in leadership, a good leader, I think, will be someone that people just want to gravitate to and talk to, and that sets an example. I have this philosophy, it ended up being a New York Times story, that you have to do something that makes yourself uncomfortable every 90 days. And that ended up being the headline of the story. And so I just try to, put myself in positions of where I am just uncomfortable, and that kind of helps me learn. I lived on food stamps for 2 weeks to just sort of understand how that, world works. 4 years ago, I started going to Burning Man just as a kind of way to sort of step outside, offices like this and sort of discover the world. And I think if you're intellectually curious and you continue to sort of say, I'm my own project, I'm going to continue with personal growth, you just constantly become a sponge. You're asking people about what's going on. You do sort of new stuff. I would say in terms of personal development, I always ask, I don't say always, but there's a couple questions you should ask yourself. Is the music you listen to the music you listened to 10 years ago, or are you listening to new type of music, right? Where are you in that? Most people tend to be locked into 18 to 24, whatever they listen to at that age, that's what they listen to for the rest of their life. That was, Time Life Music made a big living out of that, as did Columbia House many years ago. Are you sort of open to that new stuff? Are most of your friends within 8 years of your own age, or do you have people that are 30 years older and 30 years younger? And I think that's the kind of way to sort of get different perspectives on things. And if you sort of say that your goal in life is to be whatever the best version of yourself is, that you constantly sort of push yourself to, doing it. I mean, I have one person at work that likes to do these sort of, live on food stamps for 2 weeks kind of thing. And we're going to probably, maybe later this year, just literally put out of a hat, go down to a city, figure out, through random pulling out of a hat, what city, how many days, and no more than $20 in your pocket. Now figure out how to survive, right? And so that, you do that, it helps give you different perspectives on things. Management is leading people, right? I mean, it's getting people as a group to do what you want. So I think if you're a good manager over time, you sort of learn the things that work and don't. And, somebody leaves the company, you ask them why'd they leave, you sort of understand when you made a good hire, what questions did you ask, did you get what you expected? And, if you're sort of, I'm a people person, I sort of, as I have begun to understand myself, I can almost rarely enjoy something unless there's somebody else with me, right? It's just one of those things, and that's who I am. That's not who everybody is. So it's just, I am constantly reading off it. My older son has Asperger's, and that's sort of your inability to read social cues. And it was almost impossible for me to raise him for the first 15 years because I didn't get it. It's sort of the same way they say why Michael Jordan could never be a great basketball coach because he says to his guys, just go to the foul line, jump and dunk the ball, right? And what do you mean you can't do that, right? And so it took me a while to sort of, and then my wife said to me, just imagine he's in a wheelchair, right? And then try to, now how would you deal with him, right? And so I sort of had to kind of put myself in a space, but I think it's just like anything else. If you're sort of curious and you learn about stuff along the way, you'll pick it up. If that's your inclination, I'd say it's not everybody's cup of tea.